I think my favorite thing about the so-called controversies with Mushoku Tensei is always like, I feel like when they get brought up, it's like a Twitter thread or an X thread, what the hell that dude's calling it anymore. It's like 1,000 retweets or something. It's like, bro, like that's such a small fraction of the internet, but I guess it makes for a good thumbnail, so I'm a roll with it. But I think episodes like these, it reminds you that a majority of what we will see over the course of someone like Rudy's life is very flawed ways of thinking. And I think words like flawed are often misinterpreted anymore online. You say something's flawed, they're like, oh, you're just talking shit. Like, no, like, Rudy as a character is a flawed individual. From minute one, basically, of this show, most people should probably come out thinking that. But the entire reason I've always watched Mushoku Tensei is because, well, yes, I'm isekai trash, but on the flip side, it's like, the show's never treated Rudy as a good or bad person, but rather a very flawed individual. Would I be friends with Rudy? No, I wouldn't. I don't relate to him. I don't connect with his perverted things like praying to a bunch of panties, but I also don't raise my pitchforks when he does either dumb things I highly disagree with, or things that you can't even argue, like between, technically, I mean, you can make a joke, like technically he has animal abuse in this episode, but he, without a doubt, he grabs someone's chest. Like, you can't justify that, right? Like, yeah, he brushes it aside and he's able to kind of brush it under the rug so Sylphie doesn't really see it as what it technically is. But at the end of the day, Rudy is a flawed character who slowly improves himself over the course of the journey. But at the end of the day, I think you have two sides of people who talk about this. Like, there's a middle ground where I kind of see myself as. I've never been pissed off with this show. I've never raised my pitchforks being like, no, we need to cancel it. No, I don't do that. But I feel like the two loudest voices are either people who downplay what Rudy does as it's not a big deal, and then there's people who act like there's real children being hurt, or there's real people being hurt, and that this is polluting the earth. And I think both sides push them away and really look at what this show is. And that is, there is subject matter where slavery is around. There is sexual assault in this show. There is a lot of bad things in this show, but one, it ain't real. And two, I've always looked at it as this show literally treats it as these people are a part of a living world. Rudy's not just going to revolutionize the world and change things overnight, especially because he's not the perfect guy himself. And for him right now, like, he is so fixated on fixing his broken, flappy quagmire that these moments, I don't like. I'm not saying, hip hip hooray, I'm glad he tied up and kidnapped I thought he was just gonna bury him. I thought that was funny. And then, yeah, it gets actually technically disturbing, but like, that's always the point of this show, is that whether it's a character like Paul, go back to the intro of this show, Paul is a very flawed character. But because they don't just say, because Paul's a flawed character, we push him away and we never see him again, we get to see that talk with him and Rudy, where Paul feels like the mature adult one, and because of that, Rudy improves and stops thinking just of himself, but also starts thinking about his mother and those that he's lost. And because we don't just write off these flawed characters, well, maybe in my own life, I wouldn't interact with people like this. In an anime story, it provides for one character journey that I disagree with almost every other minute. I'm like, I don't agree with what these characters do or the actions that they do or how they downplay things, but I still consider Mushoku Tensei peak isekai because it actually shows characters as flawed rather than these stereotypical self-insert relatable MCs. No, like, this is a living and breathing world with the good, the bad, the ugly, and the absolute rancid, and that's why I like it. And I feel like it's important to highlight that, especially with, I guess, what people were shit talking last week and probably with what they'll shit talk this week. I think that's just how I feel anyway. I just wanted to get that little mini rant out of the way because there's actually quite a bit that made me happy about this episode. Sylphie's perspective, that was pretty damn great. I thought, I'm a little blue balls because I thought we were getting a whole episode like the Eris Goblin Slayer OVA, but it was better than nothing, so we got a lot to talk about. But I do have a full live reaction to today's wonderful episode available on my Patreon. If you would like to see that, it is over there if you're interested. First things first, we gotta talk about Sylphie. So, one, Bitchin' Room, absolutely beautiful. I just love looking at this world. Like, they'll be focusing on the wide shots, and I'm like, I love the architecture, I love the interior, and it was kind of nice because something that I know the light novels do that the anime really doesn't outside of the Eris OVA or episode 0 of season 2, where apparently a lot of characters will get like perspectives, like perspective chapters. So in this show, with the anime, which is no surprise, anime does this all the time, we focus on Rudy's more like 99% of the time. But in certain cases, we get to see Eris's goblin slaying adventures, or we get to see episode 0 with how Fitz became Fitz from going from Sylphie, right? Falling from the sky. And I think it's nice, and I really hope they do this more, because while we don't necessarily need an entire episode dedicated to a Sylphie or an Eris or this or that, I think it's important because there's been a lot of like, what I think it was either last video or the video before that I mentioned, there's so many questions I have about what Sylphie is thinking about in these moments. And it was nice getting 3.5 minutes of watching her think about Rudy and her routine. And honestly, it kind of felt similar to what we would see normally with the old opening style, where you'd have the song and then it'd be all these different scenes, her running in the morning and showing her daily routine, seeing Rudy in the distance doing the same running routine, right? But it does a good job to show you what she's thinking, and I think it adds a lot to that, because we see how Rudy is, because he's oblivious that this is Sylphie. It's been so many years, the disguise and everything, like, he doesn't remember Sylphie as, like, the well as the back of his hand, right? So he doesn't recognize. And for Sylphie, she knows that's Rudy. So it's nice kind of getting that moment. And we see, honestly, I have to admit, this is some of the best voice acting I've heard all anime season. Zanaba, man, like, when he was freaking out, when he was stammering, when he was stuttering, and he was trying to show that broken figure of Roxy, I can't believe how well he sold the VA performance, because holy hell, that felt like someone who was about to, like, if he wasn't breathing into a bag, he would have absolutely passed out. Like, that's how into the performance he felt. And I really like what they did. There is some comedy with him shaking down the two Beast Girls, and the fact that Rudy just, he takes that shit way too seriously. And there's some fun comedy, like the fact that he initially, like, he pops like a rock on their forehead and like the mudslide, everything. It was very fun, and like just seeing them tied up in the bag I thought was hilarious. I was like, bro, is he just about to body and bag these, like just bury them alive? And yeah, it definitely gets a lot more intense after that. This man, I mean, this is where it's like, oh, people brush it aside. It's sure, like, there's no excusing him just casually sexually assaulting someone. There isn't. Like, but at the same time, I don't understand the pitchforks, bro. Like, seriously, like, the characters surrounding him right now are a girl who doesn't know anything and a horny dude who rubs himself up against sculptures. This isn't really essentially people who are going to be a role model teacher moment for him, so it's kind of understandable why for them it's like, it's just normal, it's just weird, it's whatever, right? And it's like, I don't know like why this is such a controversial take of saying, I don't relate to Rudy in these moments, I don't like what Rudy does in these moments, but I also understand that these characters are flawed as fuck, man. Like, I just don't understand how else to put that. Like, I don't know, I don't really watch stories to relate to characters. Like, I don't watch Game of Thrones or read Game of Thrones and look at the number of nasty, horrible things those characters do. George R.R. Martin is one sick mofo. He does some insane shit in his works, but I loved watching, I loved reading, and some characters in that, like, it wasn't just Joffrey being treated as a villain. Like, there was plenty of characters from the other characters surrounding them perspective that's just how things were, and it was okay, right? And I think, for me, like, I don't really come to these stories to relate, but I guess if people are primarily looking at it as people just relating, then I guess let's see where the controversy comes from, but I don't know. Like, it was a disturbing scene, all things considered, and ultimately, yeah, I wasn't happy when he comes back, and I see that they soiled themselves because he just casually left them kidnapped up there, but at the same time, I look at the highs Rudy's done, and I look at the absolute lows Rudy's done, and I think it's nice to have a show that's not afraid to say, we're going to show you the ugly sides of humanity. We're going to show you the good, we're going to show you the bad, and ultimately this world is a lot more complex and feels a lot more human than a lot of these isekai that are self-insert fantasies. And I don't really feel like Mushoku Tensei is a self-insert fantasy. I feel like it's just a brutally honest take on the flaws of humanity, and that's why I personally watch it. But maybe I'm the minority, and, you know, there's just the group of people who say, oh, Rudy's doing that, that's cool, whatever, and then there's the other people say, no, if you watch that, you're gonna go buy a slave. You can't win with some people, okay? That's all I'm saying. I liked the episode. The episode disturbed me at times. The episode made me uncomfortable at times, and at other points I laughed, or at other points I was like, damn, I could have an entire episode of Sylphie if you wanted to give me another episode 0, but that's just me. Let me know what you thought, though, down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new around here, ring that bell, of course. Like I said, full live reaction is available on my Patreon. Hey, while you're there, you also get a video shout out. So today we have Sleeping Knight, Philip Reinhard, Alexander, Jonas Pierre, Luke, and Jonathan Bromlow. So I appreciate the support, everyone. Please take care and have a good one.